All right. So for the sake of time, I have 11:01. So let's go on ahead and start. Bobby from Putnam.
Awesome.
Excellent. So I'll start. So my name's Andy Tolley. I'm the 4-H RSA in the Northeast, but I'm also the person who leads the 4-H in School Action Team. And today, Elaine's going to be doing all the talking. This is Elaine. Elaine is one of our action team members. She's also has a STEM appointment in Clay County, and
Mhm.
she has developed some lunch and learns for us. And let's talk just a little bit about how we got to where we are and whatnot. And then I will hush, and we will get to the meat of what we're doing. So the idea of the making takes, and we just wanted to make sure that as we talk about this, and personally, I have the thing about not going to send out some sort of survey if we're not going to use it. So the action team some years ago sent out a survey, and we've been working through things. And one of the things that came up on the survey after our what I call our first round of things that we did with templates and things like that, the second round is making takes the idea that we have quality, just something that you can pick up. You say, hey, I need a STEM activity for this school. What can you do? The idea is that to have something that you can grab and go with it, that's kind of like a small individual lesson that you can use. Of course, you can put them together into a program if you so choose. So that's where this came from. And Elaine is the first person who says, all right, I will take on this task. And she developed using some of the materials that she has from her programming. So she's actually done these things, and then she turned them into a format with that's that school-based standards and all the other cool things that go with it. And that's kind of how we got here. And now I'm going to turn off my video and I'm going to sit back and I'm going to listen to what Elaine has to say. So Elaine, take us away.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. And thanks, everybody, for joining us today. I hope that kind of our STEM make and takes that they'll be useful to you and your county program, as well as if you're trying to get into schools or trying to maybe work with audiences that like STEM programming, but maybe you don't have necessarily the background in STEM programming to teach. So hopefully these resources will be helpful for you today. So kind of the why behind the STEM make and takes in particular. So there's a lot of research out there that shows the importance of exposure of STEM programming at a young early age. I think a lot of us, if we read data from the National Association of College Employers, we see information about kind of those workforce readiness skills. We see that STEM, having a STEM pipeline of future STEM workers is important, and the skills that come with that are important. But we also know like there is a huge gap between the actual number of kids who actually pursue majors and careers in STEM compared to those who actually are pursuing a STEM career. So just some things that I have found that are helpful, and kind of these STEM make and takes are geared toward primarily upper elementary school students, but they can be adapted from kindergarten through sixth grade. We've kind of done all these lessons with that age gamut. But some things that are just important to note. So by the fourth grade, 1 in 3 children have decided science isn't for them. So that's really kind of that's kind of startling, especially since many of our career fields, one study I found that 80% of jobs are soon going to require the math and science skills. So if you think about your county program or the youth you reach, 80% of the jobs that will be available to your youth will require those math and science skills. And so one of the things that is really key in helping kids get over that hurdle is to introduce STEM early and often and really make those connections of how what they're doing in kind of the real world or maybe things that they're doing in their everyday life connect back to STEM or STEM practices. One example I'll talk about in a little bit is we talked about how kids riding bicycles or doing skateboard, scooters, going on rollerblades, how that's physics in their everyday life. They don't know what you know, until that's kind of brought to their attention, they don't know that they're doing physics and that there's physics principles there. But helping them make those connections early, they can realize, oh, you know, there are things that I can be doing and learning, and this is how it connects to me as an upper elementary school student. Kind of the other thing that was the reason why we did the STEM make and takes, there's some research that was done by the Journal of Positive Youth Development of agents in Oklahoma, 4-H agents in Oklahoma, and they found that 75% of 4-H agents don't feel adequately trained to teach STEM. So I think that's one of the reasons why we don't see more 4-H STEM programs, is because there's a lot of hesitancy there. There's about, in that study, they said 53% of agents are concerned with making STEM applicable and engaging and appealing to wide age ranges. I know I get this challenge a lot whenever we're in an after school program and we have kids from kindergarten all the way to 6th grade in a single room, and how can you adapt to kind of both sides of the learning development spectrum. And then there's just that lack of confidence to teach the subject matter. So kind of my background, so I don't have a formal STEM education background. And so when I was hired on to be the STEM education agent in Clay County, I was like, well, I need curriculum that is easy for me to understand and easy enough for the kids to, you know, to learn and absorb. And how do I go about doing that? And just to be frank, I haven't had a math or science class in more than a decade. So I had kind of a learning curve of like, okay, I need to really kind of look at curriculum that is easy to understand, but then also that it's relevant to the kids, what they're learning in the classroom. And then also just to kind of boost my confidence in being able to train. So I really hope that today's training helps boost your confidence and understanding of STEM topics. One common misconception that many adults have, and in talking with other kind of folks in Florida 4-H, is that STEM is hard, and adults' attitudes and beliefs about STEM learning can transfer on to children. And so if we're the ones teaching our youth about STEM, and we have kind of negative reactions or perceptions to that, that will carry on to our kids. So we need to remember that we're role modeling positivity in these topics, even though we might find them challenging or we may not have that content knowledge there. So hopefully today's resources will help you feel more confident. And so just kind of how they were developed, and I'll actually in a moment go into the Teams file where you can find these. So like I said, my formal background is not in STEM education. So I really look to, in creating these STEM make and takes, for reputable curriculum through 4-H, trying to see what other states 4-H programs did. But then I also found reputable resources from organizations like NASA or Discover Engineering. I will say, if you're looking for awesome space programming, I mean, you can't get more relevant and reputable than NASA. So don't be afraid to look at outside resources outside of 4-H, because sometimes you may find really good content knowledge. Just make sure you find something reputable, either backed by like the government or reputable organization. So the activities that I picked aligned with the Florida standards. They were easy to teach and understand, and we tied it back to our county needs assessment. So I will say, with some of these activities and your kind of landscape in your county with STEM programming, you know, these activities may not tie back to your county needs assessment. For Clay County, our youth and adults had mentioned that there was a gap between engineering programs and ability to kind of participate in after school engineering. There was a gap with space science, so there wasn't enough space science activities. And then the other big one was coding and technology. So a lot of mine focus on those, but I did pull in some things like from chemistry, or pulling in things that are physics. And actually, a lot of these, as you'll look through them, we tried hard to pull math, science, engineering standards. So some lessons may not just strictly be a science curriculum. It may be, hey, you can kind of pivot it to math or pivot it to engineering based on what kind of your needs are. And so Andy had this awesome template when he put out the call for the make and takes that I kind of followed, and I'll kind of walk you through one of the examples there. So let me go ahead and stop my screen real quick. Let me go into Teams. Okay, can everybody see the Teams file? Awesome. Thank you, Karen, for that thumbs up. So if you, and I saw Andy had put the link in the chat, so thank you, Andy, for that. So if you are in our Teams file and you are in Initiative 7, you'll go into 2.2 School Enrichment, Current Resources, STEM. And these are all the different STEM make and takes. And really, the big things that we did with the STEM make and takes and how this kind of got started was I was invited to one of our private schools here in Clay County to lead a 14-week series on all things STEM for their 4th and 5th grade students. And so we had actually demoed a lot of these lesson plans with our after school audiences and then really kind of tailored it down to those 4th and 5th graders. And then we've been able to do a lot of one-offs with like other elementary science classes. And so in looking at toy car physics, that's probably one of my favorite ones. Just to kind of show you all the template. Can everybody see the Word document? Awesome. Thank you, Karen. I figure I'll pop it open in Word so that you can kind of see the format a little bit easier. So what I did was I kind of came up with, based off of the template Andy provided, is okay, if I were a science teacher and I was looking for lessons on forces or physics, and forces is, as you can tell a little bit later down, kind of a huge concept that our elementary schools cover. You know, what are some of those keywords that I would want to look for? Well, physics, acceleration, and speed. And then I kind of put what the learning objectives are. So not only what the subject matter content called for, but also those life skill development, those life skills that we look for. And again, there's lots of life skills that you can draw from this. These are the ones that I kind of noticed from when I was teaching the lessons to both our STEM Academy and our after school youth. And then also a lot of these lesson plans, I will say, again, I borrowed them from reputable resources and I kind of made adaptations. So I wanted to make sure that whoever created that, especially some of the NASA curriculum, that the credit went back to NASA, but then we added kind of our 4-H flair, whether it was tying it to the educational standards or the reflection questions, and really kind of emphasizing that do, reflect, apply model. So all of the lesson plans do have ties back to the educational standards. Again, you can emphasize which standards based on your county needs or like what your school needs are, of which ones you can emphasize more, or which ones that you can talk about all of them. But we really try to kind of hit on all of the different ones that we think this lesson plan can tie back into. And we pulled these from CPALM, so that was how we kind of matched them up. And then we have kind of our indicators of success of like, you know, at the end of the lesson, what would success look like? And then the supplies for the activity. So a lot of the activities that we have here are things that you can easily have in your office or you can find donations for. I will say I put out a call for some donations for toy cars. So think about Hot Wheels, Matchbox, metal machines, and I got like 2 big tubs. So there's a lot of things that if you don't have the money or the funds to buy, maybe you have, and this happened in our office, a mom had all these toy cars, her son had outgrew them and wanted to give them a good home. So you can find a lot of those donations, even from people in your county, so you don't have to spend that kind of money. We talked about just the introduction of like what you'll be teaching on, some background information that would be helpful for you as the facilitator to know. So for this lesson in particular, we talked a lot about knowing Newton's second law of motion, and we talked about that with our kids and with the teachers. I also put in some facilitator notes. So these are just things that as myself and my program assistant have been teaching, things that we have seen as, you know, things that worked out better the more that we taught. For this one, for example, we learned that that youth work better in groups, and to get them in groups, you need more supplies. When we did this lesson the first time, we didn't have enough supplies, so enough of the toy car launchers. And so some of the kids were there kind of with idle hands, and there were some behavior issues and things like that. So when we talked with the teacher afterward, she gave us the feedback of like, I wish you would have more. So we invested in that. We got more of the toy car launchers. We got the donations for the toy cars. So that's really helpful to kind of just some things that we learned along the way. And then we started off with the lead-in question activity to help the kids think. So this one, we started off with talking about what is physics. And a lot of kids, especially when we've done this with elementary school students, they don't know what physics is. But then when you start talking about Sir Isaac Newton and you talk about his laws of motion, sometimes the kids the light bulb starts to click, which is really great. And then if you don't have that background knowledge, we just give the definition of what that Newton's second law is, and how it ties back into the activity that we're going to be doing. And so then we talk about the experience. So the part of the lesson that should take up the most time is having the kids being able to test their Hot Wheel launchers. So you show them how, okay, you line up your launcher like this. This is the button that you click. And then this is how it will go. And once it lands, you'll put a piece of tape to mark, hey, you know, this is where car one landed. And so with toy car physics, what we've done is that we had the kids test 2 different car weights, and we had them run the test 4 times each. So they got the lighter car first, and then they did that car test 4 times. And then the second time we gave them a heavier car and then had them test it 4 times. And so at the end, when we were wrapping up, we talked about, how far did the cars accelerate down the track? Did the heavier car or the lighter car go farther? How does this tie back to Newton's second law of motion? And then we talked about, well, what could be changed if you could get the desired result? And then we talked it, and gave them the reasoning of like the lighter car took the less force to accelerate down the track. Because again, we're going back to Newton's second law of motion and how that comes into play with the weight of the physical car. And then we kind of wrapped it up with, where do you see physics in your life? And so we talked a lot about, riding bikes. We talked about when they're going home from school, whether they're in a car or they're on the bus, whether they see airplanes taking off or landing. So we try to help make those connections back. And a lot of the kids realized, oh, I do physics in my everyday life. And a lot of the kids, when they saw the toy car physics, they're like, oh, I have cars at home that I can play with. So it was good for them to make that kind of real world connection. And then at the end of each of the make and takes, we have the references of where we either pulled the curriculum or where we kind of pulled information to have the curriculum. We have an opportunity to take it further. So let's say you have an audience that you don't have to worry about the kids going to an after school special, or they have to go to PE or transition to that next class, or you have kids who are they're really fast through the activity and you have more time to kill with them. Just some opportunities to be able to make the lesson a little bit longer. And then we talk about career connections as well, of like, well, when you grow up, here are some opportunities where you could pursue physics. And this list is not exhaustive. This is just some things that we've learned along the way and gotten some feedback from the kids. So let me go ahead and stop my screen. Are there any questions so far while I get the PowerPoint back up?
I have a question. I was just
Sure.
wondering, when you're doing these, what seems to be the biggest, because I like the tips that you put in there about for facilitating and things like that. What was the biggest challenge that you've had in putting these on or conducting these? Something that if the people listening to us today, like, boy, I wish I'd have known this before I started. Now's your chance to tell them before they start.
Yeah, I would say it really is dependent I mean, we've done this with multiple audiences. And so there were some different challenges that we learned along the way. I think for our STEM Academy, where kind of they were the inspiration for the STEM make and takes, I think for them, we were always pushed up against time. So we were the last thing they did for the day before they went to, before they went home. And so we were always crunched of like, we have to get kind of our point out in 45 minutes or less. And so there were some lessons that we did break up over 2 weeks, and we only had a week with the kids for this. So we went every Monday for about 14 Mondays in a row, minus some holidays. So we had to be very quick and learn about how to be concise, how to make sure the kids had that more of that experience and reflection, trying not to spend too much time on like the beginning and kind of the introduction pieces of it. And then also too, that group taught us a lot about making sure we have enough supplies, because that group, my program assistant and she took 24 kids and I took 24 kids. And even still, that was a pretty large group. So we had to learn just like making sure we had enough supplies, doing smaller groups, helping to utilize the teachers to help maybe facilitate some of the troubleshooting with teamwork or communication. And I'll talk a little bit about what we did at one of the elementary schools this past spring. And then with our after school kids, I think it's just knowing with our after school kids, I think the biggest challenge was the developmental age range. So just making sure that, okay, if you're going to have a mixed audience of like, you're going to have everybody from 5-year-olds to 11 going on 12, just finding that middle ground of, okay, we're teaching to like the second and third graders. And then if like we have the flexibility, and it's really up to, in our county, the after school sites, if they do split them up by age division, or how do we tailor it so that the older kids and the younger kids are enjoying it, but it's not too simple or not too advanced. Does that make sense?
Yes, indeed. Any other questions for Elaine as she gets up her next? And again, the chat's open. If you don't want to speak, would rather just type something in the chat, feel free to do that.
Well, I get this back up and running. Okay, everybody can see the PowerPoint slide. Awesome. Thank you, Andy, for that thumbs up. And so this is just a slide I wanted to show what the impacts of one of that toy car physics lesson that I just walked through had on one of our classes in the spring. In these two pictures, myself and my program assistant, we went to one of our schools kind of up in the northern part of our county that's pretty urban, and we taught over 2 days for 8 second grade science classes, and there was 140 youth altogether. Now each class, they ranged between 19 and 23 kids, so we didn't have all 140 at each time. But it worked out really well because we could do the smaller groups and things like that. And they were just starting their lessons on forces and motion, since that's one of the standards that second grade talks about. And so some things that we kind of saw from that group as a collective, about 49% of the kids indicated they learned something new. So for us, we look at STEM knowledge gain. We also look at if the kids' attitudes about STEM topics or STEM careers change. So we had pretty high response to 69% of the youth indicated that they liked and had a positive reaction. And I think a lot of it, again, was tying it back to something that they do, or they may have that toy or that resource at home, and also making those connections about riding the bike or rollerblading or being, riding in the car with mom and dad. And then also we looked at the different life skills that they develop. So in my county, I specifically look at teamwork, communication, and critical thinking. And so all of the activities that I have in the Teams channel emphasizes one, if not all three of those life skills. And so another really cool part about this activity is I purposely made them work in groups because I wanted them to learn how to work in the team, how to talk to each other to get from point A to point B, and also for them to apply what they may have been learning in their science classes so far. So I will say some of the science classes, they were already in their forces in motion lesson. And then some of the kids, especially the group that I did kind of early on, they hadn't started yet. So for them, we were trying to connect, but they had talked about energy. So we talked about how energy, potential and kinetic energy is involved in this activity. So
We have a question from the chat.
Oh, okay, awesome. Let me take a look.
It's what evaluation tool was used?
Gotcha. Good question. Let me see if that's on my next slide. Okay, perfect. So this was the evaluation tool that we used, and we kind of, so I will say based on kind of with the school I was at in the spring and the STEAM Academy, we've adapted this to fit those audiences, but the questions are pretty much the same. So we did kind of a pre-survey with the kids beforehand. And a lot of these, we actually asked them to raise their hand, especially with, I know for when we have an after school site full of clover buds, the hand raise is very efficient and they actually understand that. And then when we have larger groups, the hand raise is really easy. And so I kind of came up with this based on things that I had saw from other curriculum, from Common Measures, and then just things that tie back to my own personal objectives for my county program. And so I thought what would be really simple, and a lot of our upper elementary school students kind of understand the emojis. So they understand smiley faces, agree, a myth faces don't know, or then a sad faces disagree. So I always compare it to emojis, and I ask them, based on kind of how you feel about this topic, go ahead and circle or color in the emoji that best fits how you describe. And so we kind of ask those 4 standard questions of like, I like the subject matter. I would like a job that involves the subject matter. I know how that subject matter can be used to solve everyday problems. And then they would like to study that subject matter after high school. And so we also ask about like, do they know of any careers, or do they know kind of some basic content knowledge? And then we ask kind of those same questions for the post survey. And then at the end, our 2 questions kind of changes. What did you learn from the series? And then also, what are the life skills that they developed? And so with the Clover Buds, a lot of that, because they may not know what teamwork or critical thinking means, is just observing that and using the purposeful activities to be able to get to those science series. Like I will say, one of the lesson plans in there is like the science of slime. There may not be a lot of teamwork or communication, but there's a lot of critical thinking because we talk about, using different materials. Like what would it be like making this in a pumpkin rather than making it in a bowl? And so that's a fun twist if you're looking for something for Halloween, is making pumpkin slime. So that's kind of what we use to evaluate the program. But good question. Thank you, Sandy. Are there any other questions? Okay. If not, I will go on to the next slide. So just some general notes about the make and takes. Feel free to use any of them that, best fit your county needs and best fit your program. All the make and takes can be adapted to fit K through 6. So we've done it with, I'm trying to think, with after school, we've done at least 15 after different elementary schools. We have 28 elementary schools in Clay County, so we've reached at least half in the last 2 years with the curriculum. And so we've adapted the lesson plan based on what the majority of the age is. And sometimes we use like a really simple activity, like the safe landing is a really good activity to start with to kind of gauge their knowledge and also behavior as well. because we found that sometimes, okay, maybe we need to, maybe not do bridge building because it may be too complex, but maybe we do science of slime because that's more of something that works for the little guys, or toy car physics, or we have this really engaged group of older kids. We could kind of hone in on some of those reflection questions to kind of have them start thinking about, what does this look like if you wanted to pursue a career in STEM, or like math in junior high and things like that. We're still learning new tips and tricks every day. So things that worked for Oakleaf Village Elementary, so the school that I talked about earlier today, we learned, and I think that was probably the best execution of that lesson plan, but we had a lot of practice and we learned through trial and error with the STEAM Academy and with after school. So each kind of audience has taught us something new and how to better do the curriculum. Actually, Shayna Span had a really good idea, and I can show it at the end of this presentation, of how to make our binary code activity a little bit easier for our Clover buds to read. Because again, we thought it was, oh, this is super self-explanatory, but for them and learning how to read, we realized, oh, there's kind of a challenge of how we have it formatted. So how do we format it to make it more Clover bud friendly? Most of the items in here are relatively inexpensive or can be easily donated. I talked a little bit about the Hot Wheel cars. Some of the lessons, you just need some PVC pipe. You need some empty bottles, like Coke bottles or things like that. So those are things that, I will say in this picture here for our annual STEM challenge, which isn't part of this program, but I had to put a call out for like, hey, if you have popsicle sticks or toilet paper cardboard tubes, we would love to have them. You don't know how many people want to get rid of their cardboard paper tubes until you ask for it, and how many you can get. So there's a lot that can be donated or easily found. And then also there's a lot of grant money out there to fund STEM supplies. So I could go into kind of our Bee-Bot lesson. The Bee-Bots was one thing we got with a grant, and we got 6 of them. Initially, we started with 3, but then again, we learned with some of our after-school sites and sharing. That was a big life skill that a lot of our after-school sites we taught. We needed to invest in a couple more so that it wasn't, 5 kids to a Bee-Bot. It was more like 2 or 3, something more manageable. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll show you those 2 lesson plans real quick, just because I think they have some interesting things in them.
While she's doing that, was everybody able to access the actual things in our I7 folder? I did have a message that someone was having a little bit of difficulty. And if you're not able to access it, just let me know and I can either add you to the team. I'm getting some thumbs up. That's awesome.
Nice.
Very good. And I'm going to put a plug in, a shameless plug while she's doing this, is that if you have various materials that you've put together as well, you don't necessarily need to be a part of the 4-H in School Action Team to work some of these things out and to make some of these grab and goes. The idea here is to make a repository for our colleagues, that if someone calls you up and says, hey, we're studying blah, 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 how can you help us out? So if you have some of those things and you would like to turn them into some grab and goes, reach out to me and I will see what I can do to help make that a reality. And in the end, it's going to help out all of us in 4-H when someone says, hey, I need something on horses, or I need something on gardening, or I need something on something. And somebody has developed something that can be easily accessible. You can go in, you can pick the one that works best for your situation. So just reach out to me, and that is my shameless plug.
Awesome. All right, let me share screen. Okay, can y'all see the 4-H in School binary bracelets lesson plan? Awesome, thank you for the thumbs up. So this one is one that we adapted from the University of Arkansas 4-H, but we kind of put our own twist on it, and I'll kind of show y'all a little bit later in the presentation. But some of y'all may have done this activity. It's where we teach kids the basics of learning binary code, the ones and zeros, by them making a bracelet. And so it ties into all these great computer science standards here in Florida that the schools have. And the materials are really simple. It's just if you were to make, and a lot of little girls might have this of like, if you were to make your own bracelet with beads, you would just have those beads, you would have the bracelets and scissors to cut it. But then we put our own twist on it by kind of talking about how the different color beads tie back into the ones and zeros in binary code. And so we talk a little bit about the different definitions of that. For what we did here, because the binary code activity, traditionally the kids will think of, okay, what's the first name, first letter of your first name and the last name, first letter of your last name. And they have to essentially kind of decode what that looks like. We figured, well, before we get to the bracelet activity, let's actually have them practice breaking down a code. So what we did here was one of my colleagues, I had asked her to make a bracelet using her first letter of her first name and first letter of her last name. And we took a picture of that. And then we asked the kids using the binary code key, can you guess the initials of this person's bracelet? And so this was the key that we made that with Shayna's help, we were actually able to make it a little bit more clear. Because what we had found was when this was all kind of mushed together, the kids were reading up and down rather than left to right. And so that way we kind of made it bigger so that the kids could understand it. Again, the upper elementary school students didn't have much of an issue with that, but with the little guys, the formatting was a challenge. So that was just something that we had learned from them. And then after they essentially decode the bracelet and they get an idea of like, okay, this is, if I'm counting the number of beads and I'm matching it with what letter that could be here, then it gets them to that next step of, oh, well, I know my first letter of my first name is E. This is how many different colored beads that I need to make that E. And then we talk a little bit about the delimiter, which is kind of the space between the first letter and the last letter. The other one I wanted to show, let me pull up the Coding Unplugged. So this one is with the BBOTs. And again, we kind of did our own twist on this. And again, there was a lot of great resources from the University of Arkansas. So she had a really cool activity and how we split it up was we talked about algorithms, conditions, and loops. And we started the kids kind of understanding that concept by having them do the chicken dance song. And so most kids know how to do the chicken dance song, but we have them all do the chicken dance. And so it's a great way to get them up and active. And we talk about how the different parts of doing that dance, is an algorithm and how it repeats as a loop, and how we talk about, every day, when you're on the computer or on a smart device like an iPad or a phone, how loops are things that are shortcuts for programmers to be able to repeat similar steps. So we're able to make those connections. And we often talk to kids of like, what is it like if, your computer, you're trying to, let's say, go to Google and then start space timing somebody in your family. And so we talk about the importance of code just being very specific. And then how we kind of made this our own is we have these BBOTs. And what's really great about the BBOTs is that you don't need a computer, you don't need internet access to them, but they're little robots that the kids can control and really teaches them the basics of, like doing the sequencing, doing the logic behind it. And logic is essentially how a computer interprets directions or code. So we have the kids do that after we do the chicken dance song. And we give them a little handout to help them guide, which way the little bee-bot moves. So that's just something that we added on to that to help kind of enforce that. And I will say the kids love the bee-bots, especially the little guys. The one thing we learned, here's a tip if you have bee-bots or something similar or are looking to invest in, the bee-bots have these buttons, which is really great. But you just need to set some ground rules with the kids of not having to like press it really hard, really fast. Because we actually had an after school site break one of our bee-bots because they just pushed the button so much so hard that the button got stuck. So again, things that you wouldn't think would be an issue that would come up, but they come up kind of through that trial and error. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop my screen. And then if there's any questions, comments, concerns, would love to take time to address it because that's kind of our STEM Macon takes in a nutshell.
All right. Does anybody have any questions for Elaine?
It's helpful to see the lesson plans. So thank you for sharing.
Of course.
Now, the idea behind this training today is that a lot of times, we in 4-H, you may get something in a newsletter saying, hey, there's new stuff out there. But we wanted to give people an opportunity to actually talk to the person and to have a little rollout to make sure that everybody kind of could ask those questions and see what was going on. So this is the first time we've done this. So thank you for being here.
Yes.
Any final questions for Elaine? If not, the shameless plug still stands that if you have some things that you've created or would like to create some things that we could then add and do a similar presentation like this, once you have some of those things developed, reach out and talk to me. With that, I guess that's going to wrap us up for the day. So thank you everybody for coming.
Yes, thank y'all for coming. How'd
I'm
you
going
think it
to
went?
stop recording.